I am Heather, 38, and literally last weekend my role as Freya's fierce protector? Yeah, it totally backfired. The peace I'd been holding together for my daughter, Freya, who's been a ghost of herself since her great-uncle Henry died, it blew up into a full-on family nightmare at my parents' countryside home for their perfect annual dinner. My parents, my sister Claire, and their creepy family friend Martin straight up demanded I stop coddling Freya. And when I clapped back, the room went dead silent. "You're tearing this family apart," my mother yelled, with everyone staring like I'd just set the table on fire. But here's the tea. Their shade didn't break me. It lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. A quick note, this story is copyrighted by the YouTube channel Guest Stories. Reposting, revoicing, or editing this content without permission constitutes copyright infringement. Thank you for respecting original creative work. Now, back to the story. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into my parents' driveway, the old Victorian house looming against the dusk like it was judging me before I even stepped inside. Freya sat beside me, her hoodie pulled tight, earbuds in, staring out the window like the world was on mute. She hadn't been herself for months, not since Uncle Henry, her favorite person, passed away. He'd left her everything, his savings, his little cabin by the lake, even his old record collection she adored. But she wasn't talking about it, or much of anything. Her silence was a knot in my chest, tightening every day. I turned off the engine, my hands lingering on the steering wheel. "You okay, kiddo?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She gave a half shrug, her eyes flicking to mine for a split second before darting away. That look, distant, almost scared, hit me like a punch. I'd been so focused on keeping her steady, shielding her from grief, that I hadn't noticed how deep it ran. Or maybe I didn't want to. The front door swung open before we even reached it, my mother's smile as polished as the silverware she'd been setting out for hours. "Heather, you made it," she said, her voice syrupy, like she hadn't spent the last month texting me passive-aggressive reminders about family duty. My father stood behind her, nodding stiffly, his glasses catching the porch light. Claire, my younger sister, was already there, perched on the arm of the couch with Martin, the family friend who always lingered too long at these dinners. His grin made my skin crawl, like he knew something I didn't. "Freya, sweetheart, you look pale," my mother said, brushing past me to fuss over her. Freya flinched, her hands shoving deeper into her pockets. I caught her eye, trying to telegraph, "I'm here, we're okay." But she looked away again. The air felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. We settled into the living room, the same one I'd grown up in, with its floral wallpaper and the faint smell of lavender polish. My parents loved their traditions. Same dinner, same china, same forced cheer. But I'd always been the odd one out, the one who didn't fit their mold of perfect. Claire was their golden child, married, 2 kids, a lawyer with a corner office. Me, single mom, freelance graphic designer, always scraping by in their eyes. Never mind that I'd built a life for Freya and me, that I'd been there for every school play, every late-night cry. To them, I was the screw-up who got pregnant at 22 and never fixed it. "Freya, come help in the kitchen," my mother called, her tone sharp enough to cut through the small talk. Freya hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her hoodie. I started to stand, ready to intervene, but Claire shot me a look. Half pity, half warning. "Let her go, Heather," she said softly, like I was overreacting. Martin chuckled, swirling his wine glass. "She's 16, not a baby," he said, his eyes lingering on Freya too long. My jaw tightened, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned long ago that arguing here was like shouting into a void. Dinner was set for 7, and as we moved to the dining room, the chandelier casting soft shadows over the mahogany table, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Freya sat across from me, her plate untouched, her eyes fixed on her lap. My mother prattled on about the roast, my father about his golf game, Claire about her latest case. Martin just watched, his smile too wide, too knowing. I tried to catch Freya's gaze again, but she was somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't reach. Then it happened. As my mother passed the mashed potatoes, Freya's hand brushed mine under the table. Her fingers were cold, trembling, and she pressed something into my palm, a folded scrap of paper. I froze, my heart thudding. She didn't look at me, just pulled her hand back and stared at her plate. My fingers closed around the note, and I slipped it into my pocket, my pulse racing. I didn't know what it said, but that small act felt like a scream in the silence. "Everything okay, Heather?" Martin asked, his voice smooth, his eyes narrowing slightly. I forced a smile, my hand burning where the note sat. "Just fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But inside, I was spiraling. Freya wasn't just withdrawn. She was scared. And I'd missed it. I'd been so caught up in keeping the peace, in proving I could handle this family, that I'd missed the signs. Whatever was on that note, I knew it was the spark that would light this whole facade on fire. As the conversation hummed around me, my mother asking Claire about her latest promotion, my father chuckling at Martin's lame joke about the stock market, I kept my hand in my pocket, fingers brushing the edges of that folded note. I couldn't pull it out here, not with everyone's eyes darting around the table like they were waiting for something. Freya's face was a mask, her fork pushing peas around her plate without lifting a single one to her mouth. My stomach twisted, and to steady myself, I let my mind drift back to the root of all this, to that one family gathering last year that crystallized how invisible I'd always been to them. It was Freya's 15th birthday, just a few months before Uncle Henry got sick, and I'd poured everything into making it special for her, only to watch them erase me like I was never there. It had started in the same dining room, the table decked out with the good linens and a cake I'd baked myself, chocolate fudge, her favorite, with little fondant stars I'd shaped by hand after a long night of work deadlines. Freya had been excited that morning, bouncing in the car as we drove out to the countryside, her hair tied back with the ribbon I'd bought her. "Thanks for doing this, Mom," she'd said, her voice soft but genuine, and I'd squeezed her hand, feeling like maybe I was getting something right. But as soon as we arrived, the shift happened, subtle at first, like a draft you don't notice until you're chilled to the bone. My mother had greeted us at the door, her arms opening wide for Freya but barely grazing my shoulder as I passed. "Look at you, growing up so fast," she'd cooed, steering Freya inside without a glance at the cake box in my arms. I set it down in the kitchen, wiping my hands on my jeans, and caught my father in the living room, already deep in conversation with Claire. She was there early, of course, her kids running around with toys she'd probably bought on her lunch break from the firm. Martin was lounging in the armchair, his legs crossed, sipping coffee like he owned the place. He'd been family friend for years, ever since he helped my parents with some investment thing, but his presence always felt off, like he was cataloging us for later. I busied myself arranging the gifts on the side table. Mine was a sketchbook and pencils, since Freya loved drawing, something I'd encouraged since she was little. Claire's gift was a fancy tablet, wrapped in shiny paper, and my parents had gotten her a savings bond, for her future, as they put it. As everyone gathered, my mother called out, "Claire, tell us about that big case you won last week." Claire leaned back, her smile modest but practiced, launching into the story of how she'd outmaneuvered some corporate rival in court. My father nodded along, his eyes lighting up. "That's my girl," he said, clapping her on the back, "making us all proud." Martin chimed in, "Impressive as always, Claire, you've got that killer instinct." I stood there, leaning against the doorway, waiting for a lull to mention how Freya had aced her art class project, something I'd helped her with for weeks, staying up late, researching techniques, even driving her to the supply store. But the conversation rolled on, my mother turning to Freya with, "And you, dear? How's school?" Freya mumbled something about it being fine, her cheeks flushing, and before she could elaborate, Claire jumped in with a story about her own daughter winning a spelling bee. Laughter filled the room, my parents beaming at Claire like she'd hung the moon. I felt my throat tighten, that familiar ache of being overlooked settling in. When it was time for cake, I lit the candles, everyone singing off-key, Freya's eyes bright for a moment as she blew them out. I cut the slices, passing them around, and my mother took a bite, her face lighting up. "This is delicious, Claire! Did you bring this from that bakery downtown?" Claire shook her head, laughing. "No, Mom, I think Heather made it." But my mother just waved it off. "Oh well, whoever did, it's wonderful." No eye contact, no thank you, just a quick pivot to asking Martin about his recent trip to Europe. I gripped the knife a little harder, the handle digging into my palm, forcing a smile as Freya whispered, "It's great, Mom. her hand touching my arm briefly. The gifts came next. Freya unwrapped Claire's tablet first, oohing politely, and my parents made a big fuss. "That's going to help with school so much," my father said, ruffling her hair. "Claire always knows what to get." When Freya got to mine, she smiled wider, flipping through the sketchbook pages. "This is perfect," she said, hugging me. But the room went quiet, my mother glancing at it before saying, "That's nice, Heather, practical." No questions about why I chose it, no acknowledgement that I'd noticed Freya's passion because I'd been there, listening to her dreams while they were off, celebrating Claire's milestones. Martin leaned forward, his voice casual. "Art's a hobby, right? Good to have something fun." The implication hung there. Fun, not serious, not like Claire's career. As the afternoon wore on, I tried to insert myself, mentioning how I'd taken Freya to a local art show the week before, how she'd been inspired. But my father cut in. "Speaking of inspiration, Claire, tell them about your promotion again." And just like that, I was sidelined, my words evaporating. Freya shot me a look, her eyes apologetic, but she stayed quiet, picking at the wrapping paper. I felt my fists clench under the table, nails biting into my palms. That hot flush of frustration rising. Why did I keep coming back? Why did I keep trying to prove I was part of this? They'd always seen Claire as the success, the stable one, the one who followed their script, while I was the afterthought, the one who chose a harder path with Freya. By the time we left, the sun dipping low, Freya hugged me in the car. "Thanks for today," she said, but her voice was tired, like she'd felt the weight too. I drove home with that knot in my chest, realizing it wasn't just about the birthday. It was every time. Every school event where they'd praise Claire's attendance at her kids' things but ignore mine. Every holiday where my efforts to keep Freya connected were dismissed. They'd never seen me as the glue. I was just the background, the one who didn't count. Back in the present as my mother served seconds, that memory sharpened everything. The note in my pocket felt heavier, Freya's silence louder. Whatever was happening, it stemmed from this. From years of them prioritizing their image over us. I needed to read it, but not here. Not yet. My mother hovered over the table, spooning more gravy onto plates that were already overflowing, her eyes flicking between us like she was directing a play. "Eat up, Freya, you need your strength," she said, her voice laced with that false concern that always set my teeth on edge. Freya nodded mutely, her fork scraping the porcelain in slow, mechanical motions. The note burned in my pocket, a secret weight pulling me under. But I couldn't risk unfolding it now. Not with Martin watching me from across the table, his fingers drumming lightly on his glass. To keep my hand steady, I reached for my water, the cool liquid doing nothing to ease the heat rising in my chest. That birthday memory had cracked something open, reminding me of the patterns I'd ignored for too long. But it was the night a few weeks ago, the real aha moment, that had finally made me see the cracks weren't just emotional. They were deliberate, dangerous. It had started innocently enough, or so I told myself, on a rainy Thursday evening back at our apartment in the city. Freya had come home from school later than usual, her backpack slung low, her steps dragging like she carried the world on her shoulders. I'd been at my desk, finalizing a client logo, the screen's glow, the only light in the dim room. "Hey, how was art club?" I asked, swiveling my chair to face her. She mumbled, "Fine," dropping her bag by the door and heading straight to her room without even grabbing a snack. Unusual for her, since she always raided the fridge first. I watched her door close, the click echoing, and felt that familiar twinge of worry. Since Uncle Henry's death, she'd been pulling away, but this felt different. Heavier, like she was hiding something. I gave her space at first, busying myself with dinner, stirring pasta sauce on the stove, the steam fogging the window. But as the minutes ticked by, the silence gnawed at me. I knocked softly on her door, pushing it open when she didn't answer. She was curled on her bed facing the wall, her sketchbook open but untouched beside her. "Freya?" I said, sitting on the edge, my hand hovering over her shoulder. She flinched at my touch, pulling away just enough to make my heart drop. "What's going on, sweetie? You can tell me?" Her eyes met mine then, red-rimmed and glassy, but she shook her head, whispering, "Nothing, Mom, just tired." I didn't push. God, I wish I had, But as I stood to leave, I noticed her phone lighting up on the nightstand, a text from my mother. "Remember our talk, it's for the best." My stomach flipped. What talk? That was the spark, the aha that hit like a thunderclap. All those weekends Freya had spent at my parents' without me, insisted on by them, to give you a break, they'd said, suddenly felt wrong. Uncle Henry's will had been read right after his funeral, leaving everything to Freya, with me as guardian until she turned 18. My family had acted supportive, but there were those offhand comments. Claire saying Freya didn't need the burden, Martin offering to help manage the assets. I'd brushed it off as their usual meddling, but now, seeing Freya's fear, it clicked. They weren't just neglecting us emotionally, they were plotting something around that inheritance. My hands shook as I closed her door, my mind racing. I couldn't sleep that night, pacing the living room with a cup of cold tea, piecing together the fragments. The next morning, while Freya was at school, I started digging. Quietly, methodically, like unraveling a knot without breaking the thread. I began with her phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. Guilt twisted in my gut as I unlocked it. Her passcode was her birthday, something I'd set years ago, but I had to know. The texts from my mother were innocuous at first. "Come visit soon, miss you." But scrolling back, there were others. From Claire, "Don't tell your mom everything, okay? We just want what's best." From Martin, "That paper we discussed, sign it next time you're here." My breath caught. What paper? I screenshot everything, my fingers flying, then deleted the evidence of my snooping. That fueled the fire. I moved to my laptop, searching public records. Uncle Henry's will was filed, confirming the inheritance, about $500,000 in savings, the cabin worth another $200,000. Freya was the sole beneficiary, no contests noted. But then I remembered Martin. He was some financial advisor, always at family events. I googled him, my heart pounding as articles popped up. A few complaints on review sites about aggressive tactics in estate planning, one dismissed lawsuit for fraud. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me suspicious. I called the lawyer who'd handled the will, pretending to follow up, and he confirmed everything was straightforward, but added, "Your family mentioned Freya might want to transfer assets early. Something about family trusts?" I hung up, my palms sweaty. They were trying to get her to sign over control. The struggle intensified over the next days. I couldn't confront them outright without proof, risking them cutting us off completely, or worse, manipulating Freya more. So I went deeper, alone in the evenings after Freya crashed early, which she did more often now, complaining of headaches. I noticed her taking pills, over-the-counter stuff, she said, from my mother for stress. Alarm bells screamed. I pocketed one when she wasn't looking, crushed it, and tasted a tiny bit. Bitter, not like any ibuprofen I'd had. Online forums suggested it could be something sedative. My God, were they drugging her? I started tracking her visits. She'd been there 3 weekends in a row, coming back groggy, forgetful. The breakthrough came mid-investigation, a week before this dinner. I'd driven out to the countryside under the guise of dropping off old photos, but really to snoop. My parents were out, the house empty. I still had a key from years ago. Heart hammering, I slipped into my father's study, rifling through drawers. There, in a locked file, the key hidden poorly under the desk blotter, were documents. A draft trust agreement naming Claire and Martin as co-trustees, Freya's signature forged in places, shaky, like she'd been unsteady. Medical receipts for sedatives, prescribed under my mother's name, but dosed for a teen. Emails printed out between them and Martin. "She'll sign once she's compliant, keep the doses steady." My vision blurred with rage, hands trembling as I photographed everything with my phone, the flash muted. This wasn't neglect. It was a conspiracy. False imprisonment during those visits. Fraud to steal the inheritance. I left before they returned, evidence hidden in a cloud folder only I could access. The drive home was a blur, tears streaming as I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. I'd built this secret arsenal not for revenge but to protect her. To flip their game. Freya didn't know yet. I couldn't burden her until I had a plan. But now, at this dinner, with the note in my pocket, I realized my investigation had led straight here. Whatever it said, it was the missing piece. As Claire laughed at something my father said, I excused myself to the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind me. Hands shaking, I unfolded the note. "Call 911, they're drugging me, help." My world tilted. My world tilted, the bathroom mirror fogging slightly from my ragged breaths as I clutched the sink, the note crumpling in my fist. "Call 911, they're drugging me, help." Freya's handwriting, shaky and desperate, confirmed every dark suspicion I'd unearthed in my secret investigation. But how had it come to this? How had I let it escalate to her pleading for rescue in the middle of a family dinner? My mind, desperate for an anchor, reeled back to yesterday, the day before this ill-fated gathering, when the signs of their manipulation had been blinking like warning lights. Yet I'd pushed through the anxiety, balancing my fears for Freya with the reluctant preparations, convincing myself that attending was the only way to end this quietly, on my terms, without exploding our lives just yet. It had started early, the sun barely cresting over the city skyline as I woke in our small apartment, the alarm on my phone buzzing insistently at 6 a.m. I slapped it silent, rubbing my eyes, the weight of exhaustion from another sleepless night pressing down. Freya's door was still closed. She'd gone to bed early again, complaining of a headache, and I'd watched her swallow one of those pills from the bottle my mother had given her during her last visit. For the grief, Mom had said over the phone, her voice all saccharine concern. But after tasting that crushed pill in my investigation, I knew better. It was no aspirin. My stomach churned as I padded to the kitchen, flipping on the coffee maker, the drip-drip echoing my pounding heart. I needed to confront them, but not without ironclad proof that couldn't be dismissed as overreacting. Heather. Yesterday was about steeling myself, gathering the last threads while pretending everything was normal. I poured a mug, black and strong, and sat at the table, my laptop open to the cloud folder where I'd stashed the photos of those damning documents. Scrolling through them again, my finger hovering over the screen, I zoomed in on the forged signature. Freya's name, but the loops too wobbly, like her hand had been unsteady from whatever they'd slipped her. The emails between Martin and my father. Increase the dose if she resists. The trust papers are ready. My free hand clenched the mug handle until my knuckles whitened, the ceramic warming my palm but doing nothing for the ice in my veins. Why Freya? Uncle Henry had left it to her because he saw her spark, her kindness, qualities my family never valued in me. But to them, it was money, control, a way to bolster Claire's perfect life or Martin's shady deals. I snapped the laptop shut, breathing deep, forcing the rage down. Yesterday was for preparation, not fallout. Freya emerged around 7:30, her hair tousled, eyes dull as she shuffled to the fridge. "Morning," she mumbled, grabbing a yogurt without looking at me. I watched her spoon it slowly, her movements sluggish, like she was wading through fog. "How'd you sleep?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, though my eyes scanned her face for clues. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze, her spoon clinking against the bowl. "Okay, I guess. Headache's better." Liar, I thought, but I didn't call her on it. Instead, I stood hugging her from behind, my chin on her shoulder. She stiffened at first, then leaned back slightly, her hand patting my arm. That small gesture cracked my heart. She was still in there, fighting whatever haze they'd put her in. "We're going to Grandma's tomorrow," I said softly. "You sure you're up for it?" Her nod was hesitant, her fingers tightening on the spoon. "Yeah, they want me there." The way she said it, flat, resigned, sent a shiver down my spine. Signs of manipulation, right there, but I bit my tongue, not wanting to scare her off. The morning dragged as I balanced my freelance work, a big project deadline looming for a client's rebranding, logos scattered across my screen, colors I tweaked obsessively to distract from the anxiety gnawing at me. My phone buzzed mid-morning, a text from Claire. "Can't wait to see you both tomorrow. Mom's making her famous roast. Bring that salad you do?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Famous roast, code for the same dry meat every year. And the salad? My contribution, always the afterthought. But beneath the cheer, it felt like bait, pulling us in. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, simple, non-committal, then set the phone face down, my leg bouncing under the desk. Another buzz, Mom this time. "Freya needs to sign some papers for Henry's estate. Martin will have them ready. It's routine." Routine? My breath hitched. There it was, a sign, blatant now that I knew. I didn't respond, instead opening my evidence folder again, adding screenshots of the texts. My hands trembled as I typed notes, direct reference to papers, link to forged trust. By noon, Freya headed out for a short walk. "Need fresh air," she'd said, slipping on her sneakers with unsteady hands. I watched from the window as she wandered the block, her posture slumped, phone in hand. Was she texting them? The doubt twisted like a knife. While she was gone, I prepared for the dinner, pulling out clothes from the closet. My nice blouse, ironing the wrinkles with sharp, angry strokes, the steam hissing like my suppressed fury. For Freya, I picked her favorite dress, folding it carefully into the overnight bag, though we weren't staying the night, no way. Then the salad ingredients, chopping lettuce, tomatoes, my knife thudding against the board, each slice releasing a bit of tension. But my mind raced. Should I cancel? Call the police now with what I had? No, the evidence was circumstantial. I needed something undeniable, like catching them in the act or Freya's testimony. Going tomorrow was risky. But it could be the trap I set for them. Afternoon brought more signs. A call from Dad, his voice gruff over speaker as I packed the car with the salad bowl. Heather, make sure Freya's on time, we have things to discuss. Things, the inheritance, no doubt. I gripped the phone, my nail digging into the case. What things, Dad? He paused, then chuckled. Family business, don't worry your head. The dismissal stung, same as always, but now it fueled me. We'll be there, I said evenly, hanging up before he could sense my edge. Freya returned then, cheeks flushed from the air, but her eyes still distant. Grandma called, she said quietly, sitting on the couch, her fingers twisting in her lap. Said to take my medicine before we come. My blood ran cold. Medicine. The drugs. I knelt in front of her, taking her hands. You don't have to take anything you don't want to. She looked at me, confusion flickering, then pulled away. It's fine, Mom. Helps with the sadness. Her voice broke on the last word, and I hugged her tight, feeling her tremble. That was the moment, the internal war peaking. Anxiety clawed at me, protect her now or wait to dismantle them fully? The evening wound down with forced normalcy. I finished my work project, emailing the client with a steady hand, though my mind was elsewhere. We ate pasta for dinner, Freya picking at hers, me watching every bite. Tell me about Uncle Henry, I prompted gently, hoping to draw her out. She smiled faintly, recounting how he'd teach her to fish at the cabin, her voice warming briefly. But then it faded, her hand rubbing her temple. I miss him. Me too, kiddo. Bedtime came, and as she brushed her teeth, I slipped the pill bottle from her bag, dumping the contents into the toilet, flushing them away. She didn't notice, or if she did, said nothing. Lying in bed later, staring at the ceiling, the anxiety crested like a wave. Tomorrow, the dinner, would be the judgment day. I'd go armed with my phone's evidence, ready to call if needed. But the signs yesterday had been everywhere. The texts, the calls, Freya's fog. Why hadn't I acted sooner? Because family, that insidious tie, made me doubt. But no more. Back in the bathroom, the memory of yesterday snapped me to the present, the note still in my hand. My reflection stared back, resolute. It was time. My reflection stared back, resolute, but my hands were shaking as I shoved the note deep into my pocket, the paper crinkling against my thigh. Call 911 right now? In the middle of this? My phone was in my purse back at the table. And if I dialed from here, they'd hear the door locked too long, wonder why I hadn't returned. No, I needed to play it cool, get back out there without tipping them off, maybe slip away later or find a moment to text discreetly. Freya needed me steady, not panicking. I splashed water on my face, the cold droplets snapping me alert, then dried off with the hand towel, folding it precisely to buy a few more seconds. Deep breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, like those meditation apps I'd tried during sleepless nights. Okay, Heather, act normal. I unlocked the door, the knob turning with a soft click, and stepped back into the hallway, the murmur of voices from the dining room pulling me forward like a tide I couldn't fight. As I re-entered the room, the chandelier light hit me like a spotlight and all eyes flicked up. Subtle, but there, like they'd been waiting to pounce. My mother was midway through serving herself another slice of roast, her knife pausing in the air. Everything all right, dear? She asked, her tone honeyed, but with that undercurrent I'd known since childhood, the one that said, don't make a scene. I nodded, sliding back into my chair, my napkin unfolding in my lap with deliberate care. Just a little headache, I lied, my voice even, though my pulse thrummed in my ears. Freya's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, pleading, terrified, before dropping back to her plate. She poked at her food, her fork tines scraping faintly, a sound that grated against the forced politeness hanging in the air. Claire leaned forward then, her wineglass stem twisting between her fingers, a small smile playing on her lips. Headache? You should try those supplements I told you about, Heather. They're a game changer for stress. Her words landed like a backhanded compliment, implying I was always stressed, always the one falling apart. I forced a tight smile, my fingers gripping the edge of the tablecloth under the table, the fabric bunching in my palm. Thanks, I'll look into it, I said, but she wasn't done. I mean, with your freelance thing it must be tough, unpredictable hours, right? Not like a steady job? She sipped her wine, her eyes sparkling with that faux sympathy, the kind that masked judgment. My father grunted in agreement, wiping his mouth with his napkin, folding it neatly before speaking. Claire's right. Stability's important, especially for Freya's sake. He glanced at Freya, who shrank a bit in her seat, her shoulders hunching inward. The barrage had begun just like always, but tonight it felt sharper, each word a prod testing my resolve. Martin chimed in next, his chair creaking as he shifted, his gaze lingering on me a beat too long. Freya seems quiet tonight. You keeping her busy, Heather? Art classes still? He said, art classes, like it was a hobby for toddlers, not the passion that lit Freya up. I nodded, my jaw clenching slightly, feeling the muscle twitch. Yeah, she's got a big project to do, she's talented. But my mother waved a hand dismissively, her rings catching the light. Talent's nice, but practical skills pay the bills. Claire here just closed a deal that could set her up for years. She turned to Claire, beaming, her hand patting my sister's arm. Tell them about it, honey. Claire obliged, launching into a detailed recount of her latest courtroom victory, her voice animated, hands gesturing as she described outsmarting the opposing counsel. My father leaned in, nodding vigorously, his fork forgotten midway to his mouth. That's impressive, real grit. Martin raised his glass. To Claire, making the family proud. They clinked glasses, the sound tinkling like mockery, while I sat there, my own glass untouched, the wine swirling untouched as I twisted the stem. Freya's foot nudged mine under the table. Accidental? Or a silent plea? I pressed back gently, trying to reassure her without words, but my mind was screaming. How long had this been building? The drugging, the pressure, it was all tied to this, their contempt for my unconventional life spilling over onto her. The questions kept coming, laced with those insidious compliments that weren't compliments at all. My mother turned to me mid-bite, her fork hovering. Heather, have you thought about going back to school? Something in business, maybe? It could open doors. Her eyes softened falsely, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out my flaws. I swallowed a retort, my throat dry, and managed, I'm happy with design, it's flexible for us. But Claire snorted lightly, covering it with a cough. Flexible is one way to put it. Remember when you turned down that office job Mom set up? Could have been a stepping stone. She said it casually, but her eyes flicked to Freya, as if to say, see what poor choices look like. Freya's hands fidgeted in her lap, her nails picking at a cuticle, drawing a tiny bead of blood she quickly wiped on her napkin. My father piled on, his voice gruff but pointed. We've been thinking about Freya's future a lot lately. With Henry's gift, she needs guidance. Not everyone can handle that responsibility. He avoided my gaze, cutting into his meat with precise strokes, the knife scraping the plate. Martin nodded sagely, his fingers steepled. Absolutely. I've offered to help manage it, pro bono of course. Can't have it sitting idle. His smile was oily, his eyes darting to Freya, who paled, her lips pressing into a thin line. The subtext was clear. I wasn't capable. I was the failure, the one who'd messed up by raising her alone. My hand slipped to my pocket, brushing the note, a reminder of the horror beneath their words. They weren't just condescending. They were laying groundwork, pressuring her right here in front of me. I endured it, bite by bite, my fork moving mechanically as I pushed food around my plate. Each remark landed like a pinprick. My mother's, "You look tired, dear, maybe cut back on those late nights," Claire's, "My kids are thriving in extracurriculars, Freya should try sports instead of drawing," Martin's, "Single parenting's tough, lucky you have family to lean on." My knuckles whitened around my utensils, the metal cool against my skin, but I kept my face neutral, nodding politely, my responses short. Inside, fury simmered, mixing with fear for Freya, who sat silent, her eyes glassy. From the drugs? Or sheer will to hold it together? The air felt thicker, the sense of rosemary and garlic turning cloying as their voices overlapped in a chorus of subtle digs. Finally, as dessert plates were set down, apple pie, my mother's specialty, slices doled out with flourish, the tempo shifted. My father cleared his throat, folding his hands on the table. "Heather, we've got something to discuss. About Freya and the inheritance." My heart stuttered, but I met his gaze, my chin lifting slightly. This was it. The gauntlet peaking, their contempt boiling over into action. Freya's hand trembled as she reached for her water, spilling a drop that spread on the tablecloth like an omen. My father's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, the room falling into a hush broken only by the faint drip of water from Freya's spilled glass soaking into the tablecloth. I watched the stain spread, dark and irregular, mirroring the chaos twisting in my gut. His hand stayed folded on the table, knuckles prominent, as if bracing for impact. My mother set down her dessert fork with a deliberate clink, her lips pursing slightly, while Claire shifted in her seat, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass in slow circles. Martin leaned back, arms crossed, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp, calculating. Freya froze, her hand still clutching the glass, knuckles white, her breath coming in shallow puffs that I could hear from across the table. I kept my face composed, though my thigh pressed against the note in my pocket, a silent anchor. "What about it, Dad?" I asked, my voice steady, forcing him to say it outright. He cleared his throat again, a habit when he was about to deliver what he called tough love, his gaze finally meeting mine, cold, unwavering. "We've been talking as a family about what's best for Freya. Henry's passing, it's changed things. That inheritance is a big responsibility, and frankly, Heather, we're concerned you're not equipped to handle it." His words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last, but I didn't flinch, my nails digging into my palms under the table to keep from reacting. My mother nodded along, her hand reaching out to pat Freya's arm, but Freya pulled back subtly, her elbow knocking the table edge with a soft thud. "We've seen how you've been raising her," Mom added, her tone soft but slicing. "All that artsy stuff, no structure. Claire here has offered to step in, help guide her." Claire jumped in then, her voice smooth, practiced from years in courtrooms. "It's not personal, Heather, but Freya needs stability. My kids have routines, goals. You've been, well, interfering with that, questioning our advice, keeping her away sometime." She glanced at Freya, who stared at her plate, her fork trembling as she set it down, the metal clattering faintly. "Interfering? That's what they called my protectiveness? My efforts to shield her from their judgments?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I swallowed it, my tongue pressing against the roof of my mouth. Martin chimed in, his voice oily as he uncrossed his arms, gesturing vaguely. "Legally, it's tricky, but we've drawn up papers for a family trust. Claire and I as overseers, Freya signs, and it's protected. No more worries." The conversation escalated from there, their voices layering like a building storm. My father leaned forward, his chair creaking under his weight. "You've always gone your own way, Heather. We supported you after everything. But it's time to face facts. You're holding her back." His finger tapped the table for emphasis, the sound rhythmic, insistent. My mother sighed, dabbing her mouth with her napkin, folding it precisely before speaking. "Remember last month? You canceled Freya's visit because of some art show. We had plans to discuss her future. That's interfering." Her eyes narrowed, accusation glinting. Claire nodded vigorously, her earrings swaying. "And the questions about the vitamins we gave her, for her health, Heather. You act like we're the enemy." "Vitamins? The drugs," I knew now, but I bit back the retort, my teeth grinding audibly in the quiet. Freya's breathing quickened beside me, her chest rising and falling in short bursts, her hand slipping under the table to clutch the edge of her chair, fingers curling tight. I wanted to reach for her, but any move felt like it would shatter the fragile balance. Instead, I focused on them, my gaze shifting from one to the other. "So what are you saying?" I pressed, my voice low, forcing them to the edge. My father straightened, his shoulders squaring. "We're saying it's time for a change. If you keep interfering, we're done. No more support, no more family ties. You're out." The words dropped like a verdict, formal and final, his hand slicing the air for emphasis. "Disowned. Officially, in this polished dining room with pie crumbs on plates, My mother's eyes welled with practiced tears, her hand fluttering to her chest. "We don't want this, but you've left us no choice." Claire piled on, her tone turning pleading but sharp. "Think about Freya. She could live with us part-time, get proper guidance. You've made mistakes. We all know it." Mistakes: getting pregnant young, choosing creativity over corporate, prioritizing Freya over their expectations. Martin's nod was slow, deliberate, his fingers drumming once on the table. "It's for the best. Sign the papers tonight, Freya, and we can move forward without complications." Complications? Me. The emotional neglect I'd endured for years crystallized here. Not just ignoring me but erasing me, all to seize control. My heart hammered, rage bubbling, but I held it, my foot nudging Freya's under the table in silent solidarity. She pressed back, her shoe trembling against mine. The escalation peaked as my father pulled a folder from beside his chair, prepared, waiting, sliding it across the table toward Freya. "Here. Read it. It's simple." The paper rasped against the wood, stopping inches from her. Freya's eyes widened, her face paling, her hand recoiling as if burned. I don't," she stammered, her voice a whisper, cracking. My mother reached over, pushing the folder closer. "Sweetie, it's okay, we're family." But Freya shook her head, tears welling, her chair scraping back slightly as she shifted away. The room tensed, their faces hardening, my father's jaw setting, Claire's eyes narrowing, Martin's smile fading into a thin line. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "You're not touching her inheritance," I said, my voice cutting through, firm but controlled. My hand rested on the table, fingers splayed, steady despite the storm inside. My father scoffed, his napkin tossed down. "See? Interfering. This is why, Heather. You're disowned, effective now. No more invites, no more help. Leave if you can't accept it." The finality hit like a slap, years of polite dismissal boiling into outright rejection. My mother's tears flowed freely now, but her eyes were dry underneath, performative. Claire avoided my gaze, fiddling with her fork. Martin watched, silent but satisfied. Freya's sob broke the silence, soft but piercing, her hands covering her face, shoulders shaking. I stood then, my chair pushing back with a screech, my hand reaching for her. "We're leaving." But my father blocked the way metaphorically, his voice booming. "Not with her. She stays until this is sorted." The threat hung, escalating everything, their plan exposed in the raw. My phone was in my purse, inches away. The note screamed in my mind. This was the moment their conspiracy cracked wide. But humiliation burned first, deep and raw, as they stared me down like a stranger. The room pulsed with tension, their stares pinning me like a specimen under glass, my father's words, "Not with her," echoing in the charged silence. I stood frozen for a beat, my hand outstretched toward Freya, who huddled in her chair, tears streaking her cheeks, her fingers knotted in the tablecloth so tightly, the fabric bunched and twisted. Humiliation burned through me, hot and unrelenting, years of their subtle erasures culminating in this outright banishment, treating me like an intruder in the family I'd fought to hold together. My purse hung on the back of my chair, within reach, my phone inside, a lifeline I'd ignored until now. The note's words seared my mind. "Call 911. They're drugging me. Help." This was it, the deepest low, their threat to keep Freya here, stripping away any doubt. I couldn't wait. Action surged through me like adrenaline, my decision crystallizing in that split second. I lunged for my purse, the strap catching briefly on the chair arm, yanking it free with a sharp tug that sent a napkin fluttering to the floor. "What are you doing?" Claire snapped, her chair scraping as she half rose, her hand slamming the table, rattling the dessert plates. My fingers fumbled the zipper, heart slamming against my ribs, but I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with a soft glow. Freya's eyes locked on mine, wide and desperate. A silent nod urging me on, her trust in that gaze stealing my resolve. My thumb swiped the emergency dial, the numbers 911 blurring slightly through my adrenaline haze, and I hit call, pressing the phone to my ear before they could react. The ringtone buzzed, once, twice, my breath shallow as the operator's voice crackled through. 911, what's your emergency?" My family erupted then, my father standing abruptly, his face reddening, veins bulging in his neck as he barked, "Heather, put that down! This is ridiculous!" My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, fingers trembling, while Martin pushed back from the table, his eyes narrowing to slits, calculating the fallout. Claire reached across, trying to grab the phone, her nails scraping my wrist, but I twisted away, backing toward the wall, the cool plaster against my shoulder grounding me. "My daughter needs help," I said into the phone, my voice steady despite the chaos, words tumbling out. "She's being drugged by my family. They're trying to force her to sign over her inheritance. We're at 472 Oak Lane, Countryside. Send police now." Freya sobbed openly now, her chair tipping slightly as she stood, wobbling on unsteady legs, effects of whatever they'd given her earlier, no doubt, her hand clutching the table edge for support. "Mom," she whispered, the word breaking, and I motioned her toward me, my free arm opening. She stumbled over, burying her face in my shoulder, her body shaking against mine, the faint scent of her shampoo mixing with the dinner smells in a surreal haze. The operator's questions came rapid fire. "Ma'am, is everyone safe? How many people are there? Describe the situation." I answered in clipped sentences, my eyes never leaving them, my father's fists clenching at his sides, pacing a short path, his shoes thudding on the hardwood, my mother's tears turning real now, her handkerchief twisting in her hands as she murmured, "How could you?" Claire's face paling, her lips moving soundlessly, perhaps realizing the legal web unraveling. Martin, frozen, his phone in hand but not dialing, sweat beading on his forehead. "Police are on the way, ma'am. Stay on the line," the operator said, her tone calm, professional, an anchor in the storm. I lowered the phone slightly but kept it connected, speaker on now, the faint static filling the room like an accusation. "You have no idea what you've done," my father growled, his finger jabbing the air toward me, stopping short as if an invisible barrier held him. But I did know. This call was the hammer shattering their facade, revealing the conspiracy I'd pieced together in secret. The drugging during her visits, the forged papers, the emails plotting to manipulate her into signing away Uncle Henry's legacy, it all poured out now, my voice rising as I confronted them. "I have proof. The sedatives you gave her, the trust documents with her signature faked. I photographed everything in your study, Dad." Emails to Martin about keeping her compliant. This isn't family, it's fraud, false imprisonment. Their reactions cascaded. My mother's sob choked off, her hand dropping the handkerchief, which fluttered to the floor like a white flag. Claire's eyes darted to Martin, accusation flashing. Perhaps she'd been in the dark on the depths, or maybe not, her lawyer instincts kicking in as she whispered, "We can explain." Martin's composure cracked, his chair toppling as he stood, backing toward the door, his hands raised placatingly. "Heather, let's talk rationally. No need for police." But Freya lifted her head from my shoulder, her voice small but fierce, trembling as she added, "They made me take pills. Said it was for grief, but I felt wrong, sleepy. They locked me in the guest room last time, said it was for my own good until I signed." Her words hung raw and damning, her fingers digging into my arm, drawing strength from the contact. The minutes stretched, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking relentlessly, each second amplifying the reveal. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, slicing through the night, the external force I'd summoned crashing into their calculated world. My father's pacing halted, his shoulders slumping as realization dawned, his face ashen. You went through my things?" he muttered, but the fight was draining, his hands opening and closing futilely. I held Freya closer, my chin resting on her head, whispering, "It's okay now." Though my own legs felt weak, the adrenaline ebb masking the emotional toll. The call had changed everything, not just exposing them, but freeing us, the scale of their betrayal laid bare in this room of polished lies. Headlights flashed through the windows, tires crunching gravel outside, doors slamming as officers approached. A knock pounded the front door, authoritative and final. Martin glanced at the folder on the table, the incriminating papers, his hand twitching toward it, but too late. The conspiracy unraveled here, in real time, my deepest humiliation flipping to empowerment with one desperate call. Headlights pierced the dining room windows, casting long shadows across the table where the half-eaten pie sat congealing, the sirens winding down to a low whine as car doors slammed outside. The knock came again, heavier this time. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house like judgment. I held Freya tight against me, her tears soaking my blouse, her body still quivering from the drugs and the fear, while the operator's voice murmured assurances from my phone speaker. "Officers are at the door, ma'am, let them in." My family's stunned scramble unfolded in slow motion, their faces a mosaic of panic and denial, the hypocrisy I'd swallowed for years now exposed raw under the chandelier's unforgiving light. My father froze mid-pace, his hand hovering as if to grab the incriminating folder, but he retracted it, fingers curling into a fist that thumped uselessly against his thigh. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice cracking, the authoritative boom reduced to a whisper. Claire was the first to move, her chair toppling backward with a crash as she stood, her hands fluttering to smooth her skirt, a nervous tic from her courtroom days, before darting toward the folder, snatching it up and clutching it to her chest like a shield. "Heather, call them off. We can talk this out. Family doesn't do this." Her eyes pleaded, wide and desperate, but laced with that same condescension, as if I were the unreasonable one. Martin edged toward the side door, his phone slipping from his pocket to the floor with a clatter, his face slick with sweat as he bent to retrieve it, fumbling the device twice before pocketing it. "No need for escalation," he said, his voice strained, attempting that smooth advisor tone but failing, cracking on the last syllable. My mother remained seated, her handkerchief balled in her fist, tears streaming unchecked now, her lips moving in silent denial. "My baby, how could you?" The knock persisted, followed by a voice, "Police, open up." I disentangled from Freya gently, keeping one arm around her shoulders, her hand gripping my sleeve like a lifeline, nails digging in through the fabric. "Stay here," I whispered to her, my voice calm despite the adrenaline surging, then moved toward the hallway, my steps measured, deliberate. My father blocked my path briefly, his arm outstretched, palm up in supplication. "Heather, please, think about what you're doing. We're your family." The word family twisted like a knife. He'd just disowned me minutes ago, yet now invoked it as a weapon. I met his gaze, my own steady, the years of polite neglect flashing, ignored birthdays, dismissed achievements, the constant elevation of Claire while I scraped by. "Family?" I echoed, my tone low but cutting, stepping around him, my shoulder brushing his arm. He recoiled as if burned. At the front door I twisted the knob, pulling it open to reveal two officers. One male, broad-shouldered with a notepad ready, the other female, her hand resting casually on her belt, eyes scanning past me into the house. "Ma'am, you called about a disturbance? Possible drugging and fraud?" the woman asked, her voice professional, clipped. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in, the cool night air rushing past, carrying the scent of pine from the countryside. "Yes, my daughter, she's 16. They've been giving her sedatives to make her sign over her inheritance. I have proof on my phone." Freya appeared behind me then, her steps faltering, supported by the wall, her face pale but resolute. The male officer's brow furrowed, his pen poised. "Let's get everyone in one room. No one leaves." Back in the dining room, the officers herded us together, the space feeling smaller now, claustrophobic with authority present. My family scrambled verbally now, words tumbling in a frantic bid to rewrite the narrative. Claire set the folder down hastily on the sideboard, her hands raising innocently. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. We're just discussing family matters. Heather's always been dramatic." She shot me a look, half accusing, half begging, her fingers twisting her wedding ring round and round. Martin nodded vigorously, positioning himself near the window, as if distance could absolve him. "I'm just a friend helping with finances, no harm intended." My mother sniffled, dabbing her eyes. "We love Freya, we'd never." But her voice trailed off as the female officer knelt beside Freya, who sat shakily in a chair, her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles white. I remained calm, centering myself with deep breaths, the note still in my pocket like a talisman. Pulling out my phone, I opened the cloud folder, the screen illuminating my face as I scrolled to the photos, the emails, the forged documents, the pill receipts. "Here," I said, handing it to the male officer, my hand steady. "Emails plotting to drug her for compliance. Forged signatures on a trust transferring everything to them. She's been locked in during visits. False imprisonment." The officer's eyes widened as he swiped through, his partner glancing over, her expression hardening. Freya spoke up then, her voice gaining strength, though it wavered. "They gave me pills, said it was for Uncle Henry's death. Made me sleepy, confused. Last weekend they wouldn't let me leave until I promised to sign." She pointed at the folder. "That's the paper." The scramble intensified. my father's face crumpling, his hands gesturing wildly. It's not like that. We were protecting her from Heather's instability. Instability? The hypocrisy boiled over. They'd praised Claire's stability while undermining mine, yet here they were, the criminals. Claire interjected. Wait, officers, let's verify. Freya's emotional. Grief does that. But the female officer silenced her with a raised hand, cuffing Martin's wrists first as he tried to edge away, the metal clicking shut with finality. Sir, you're not going anywhere, he protested, his voice pitching higher. I have rights. My mother wailed, collapsing into her chair, her hands covering her face. Calmly I exposed it all, my words measured, each one a brick dismantling their facade. You've neglected us for years, ignored my efforts, celebrated Claire while dismissing me. But this? Drugging my daughter for money? That's not protection, it's greed. My father's shoulders sagged, handcuffs snapping on next, his head bowing. Claire resisted briefly, her lawyer voice emerging. I demand a call, but the officer Mirandized her mid-sentence, leading her out. The arrests unfolded swiftly, the folder seized as evidence, statements taken in the living room amid the floral wallpaper that now felt mocking. As they were led to the cruisers, blue lights flashing across the walls, I stood on the porch with Freya, my arm around her, the night air chilling my skin. My mother's last look, betrayed, broken, almost stirred pity, but I quashed it. Their hypocrisy had earned this. You did this to us, she whispered from the car window, but I turned away, guiding Freya inside. The door shut behind us, a powerful exit from their world, the lock clicking like closure. Paramedics arrived shortly, checking Freya, confirming the sedatives in her system, while I gave my full statement, the weight lifting with each word. The door shut with a solid thud, sealing out the flashing lights and the muffled protests from the cruisers as they pulled away, gravel crunching under tires into the night. Freya sagged against me in the hallway, her weight heavy on my arm, her breaths coming in shaky hitches that vibrated through us both. The house felt eerily quiet now, the dining room's chaos reduced to scattered chairs and cold pie remnants, the air still thick with rosemary and betrayal. Paramedics bustled in shortly after, their boots tracking faint dirt on the entry rug, efficient hands guiding Freya to the couch for checks, blood pressure cuff inflating with a hiss, flashlight clicking to examine her pupils. She's stable, but we'll take her to the ER for blood work, one said, a kind-faced woman named Lisa, her voice soft as she draped a blanket over Freya's shoulders. I nodded, my hand stroking Freya's hair, the strands damp from tears, while an officer lingered, notepad in hand, wrapping up my statement. This moment, surrounded by these strangers who'd become allies in an instant, stood in stark contrast to the toxic farce of that dinner table, where blood ties had meant control, not care. As we waited for the ambulance, the contrast sharpened in my mind, every detail of the evening replaying like a bad film against this new warmth. Back there, under the chandelier's glare, my family's love had been a performance. My mother's fussing over plates hiding her role in dosing Freya, Claire's stories of success masking her envy of the inheritance, Martin's grins concealing his fraud. They'd sat in judgment, forks clinking, voices overlapping in condemnation, their eyes avoiding the truth of Freya's pallor, her silence a convenience. Now, here in the living room, Lisa knelt at Freya's level, her gloved hand gentle on her wrist. You're safe now, honey. Tell me how you're feeling. Dizzy? Nauseous? Freya whispered responses, her voice gaining volume with each word. Sleepy? Scared? And Lisa nodded, no judgment, just empathy, her pen scratching notes without interruption. The officer, a tall man named Ruiz, stood by the mantel, his radio crackling softly, but he waited patiently, his posture relaxed, not looming like my father's had. I sat beside Freya, our hands intertwined, her fingers cold but squeezing back, a silent thank you that warmed me more than any family praise ever had. The paramedics worked methodically, one drawing a quick blood sample, the needle pricking with a sharp sting that made Freya wince, her grip tightening on mine, the other monitoring her vitals on a portable machine, beeps steady and reassuring. Sedatives confirmed, but levels are dropping, Lisa said, looking at me with a small smile. Good call getting help when you did. Her words landed like balm, validating the spark I'd ignited with that 911 dial, unlike the dinner's barrage where my instincts were interfering. Officer Ruiz chimed in, closing his notepad with a snap. We've got the evidence from your phone. Solid case. Social services will follow up, but for tonight, focus on her. His tone was supportive, eyes meeting mine without pity, just respect. A far cry from Martin's oily offers or Claire's backhanded advice. Freya leaned her head on my shoulder, her breathing evening out under the blanket's weight, and I felt the shift. The biological family I'd chased approval from paling against these chosen ones, bound not by blood but by duty and decency. At the table, bonds had been weapons, my parents wielding family duty to isolate me, Claire her achievements to diminish, all while Freya sat trapped, her note a desperate bridge to me. Here, the allies moved with purpose. Lisa packing gear with efficient zips, Ruiz radioing for updates, his voice low to not startle Freya. You did right by her, he said quietly, handing me his card, fingers brushing mine briefly in solidarity. No demands, no ultimatums, just genuine aid, the kind I'd craved from my own kin, but never got. As the ambulance arrived, lights off to keep things calm, the paramedics helped Freya onto the stretcher, wheels clicking over the threshold. I followed, climbing in beside her, the doors closing with a reassuring latch. The ride was smooth, Freya's hand in mine, Lisa monitoring from the bench opposite, chatting lightly about her own teen daughter to ease the tension. Kids are resilient, she said, adjusting an IV drip with careful turns, especially with moms like you watching out. Freya managed a faint smile, her eyes meeting mine, the fog lifting slightly. At the ER, nurses took over seamlessly, a doctor with a warm handshake examining her, ordering tests with nods and explanations, no rushed dismissals. Social worker arrived too, a woman named Maria, sitting with us in the curtained bay, her notebook open but her focus on Freya's story, listening as she recounted the weekends locked away, the pills forced under caring guises. The contrast hit hardest then, in that sterile room with beeping monitors and fluorescent hum. Biological ties had bred neglect, a polite veneer over greed, while these allies, strangers hours ago, offered unasked support. Maria's gentle questions, drawing out details without pressure, the doctor's clear plan for detox and counseling, even the nurse bringing water with a kind word. Freya opened up more, her voice steadier, describing how Uncle Henry had been her safe haven, how the family twisted his memory. I added my pieces, the investigation, the photos, Maria nodding, her hand patting Freya's arm. You're both strong, we'll make sure this sticks. No hypocrisy, no scramble, just action, rebuilding what blood had broken. By dawn, tests done, Freya dozed under observation, her face peaceful for the first time in months. I sat vigil, coffee from a sympathetic nurse warming my hands, reflecting on the dinner's chill versus this warmth. Biological family had disowned me in a blaze of self-interest, but here, chosen allies, Lisa, Ruiz, Maria, the medical team had stepped in without hesitation, their actions speaking loyalty louder than any shared DNA. It wasn't pity. It was partnership, validating my fight, honoring Freya's pain. As sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the floor, I squeezed her hand, whispering promises of better days, the toxic past, fading against this genuine circle of care. As sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the floor in golden bands, I squeezed Freya's hand tighter, her fingers lax in sleep but warm, a sign the sedatives were finally waning. The ER bay hummed softly around us, monitors beeping in rhythm, nurses' shoes squeaking on linoleum as they passed, the faint scent of antiseptic mingling with the coffee I'd long since abandoned on the side table. Maria, the social worker, had left her card with promises of follow-up visits, her departure marking the shift from crisis to aftermath, leaving me to navigate the rubble alone. But alone didn't feel empty now. It felt like space to build, to fortify boundaries I'd let erode for too long. This morning, in the quiet hours before discharge, became about handling the immediate fallout. The calls, the questions, the internal tug-of-war over what contact, if any, to allow with the remnants of my family, establishing rules that prioritized Freya's healing over any lingering guilt or habit of reconciliation. The doctor returned first, clipboard in hand, his white coat rustling as he pulled back the curtain with a metallic scrape. Tests look good, no long-term damage from the sedatives. She can go home soon, but monitor for withdrawal symptoms, headaches, anxiety. Counseling's recommended, I'll refer you. He handed me a sheaf of papers, discharge instructions clipped neatly, his pen tapping the top sheet for emphasis. I nodded, folding them into my purse. the weight of the note still there like a relic. Freya stirred then, her eyes fluttering open, squinting against the light. "Mom, what now?" Her voice was hoarse, small, but the fog had lifted, leaving clarity that mirrored my own resolve. I brushed her hair back, my thumb tracing her forehead. "We go home, and we set some rules. No more visits, no calls without your say-so." But the aftermath pressed in before we even left. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, vibrations like insistent knocks, first from unknown numbers, likely reporters sniffing the arrest story that had probably hit local news by now. Then from Claire's husband, his voicemail pleading, "Heather, this is a mess. Claire's at the station. They need bail. Call me." I listened in the hallway, leaning against the cool wall tiles, my finger hovering over delete. Bail? For the woman who'd orchestrated the trust fraud, who'd dismissed my life while plotting against Freya's? No. I hit delete, the action sending a ripple of finality through me, my shoulders straightening. Next came a text from my cousin, extended family I'd barely seen. "Heard about your parents. Shocked. What happened?" I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, temptation to explain warring with the need to protect our peace. "Not now," I typed back, simple and firm, then blocked the number temporarily, a new rule forming, no explanations to those who'd never bothered before. Discharge took an hour, signing forms, the nurse wheeling Freya out to the car I'd had a friend drop off, her blanket folded neatly in her lap. The drive home was silent at first, countryside giving way to city streets, Freya watching the passing trees with a distant gaze. "Will they call?" she asked finally, her fingers picking at the blanket's edge, unraveling a loose thread. I glanced at her, traffic light turning red ahead, my foot easing on the brake. "Maybe, but we don't have to answer. That's rule 1, your choice, always." She nodded slowly, her hand reaching for the radio, turning it on low, soft indie music filling the car, a barrier against the world. At home, our apartment felt like a sanctuary, the door locking behind us with a click that echoed my intent. I helped Freya to the couch, propping pillows, fetching water, her sips slow and deliberate. The calls escalated by afternoon. My father's lawyer, a stern voice on voicemail. "Ms. Thompson, we need to discuss the charges. Your cooperation could mitigate." Mitigate? For drugging a child for fraud? I played it on speaker while making tea, the kettle whistling over his words, steam rising as I poured. Freya listened from the couch, her mug cradled in both hands. "Don't call back," she said quietly, blowing on the hot liquid, ripples forming on the surface. I agreed, deleting the message, then sat beside her, our knees touching. Rule 2. No legal favors. They face what they did. But internally, doubt flickered. Years of conditioning, that pull to keep the peace, whispering their family. I quashed it, focusing on Freya's tired eyes, the way she leaned into me. Trust rebuilt in this space we'd claimed. Evening brought more, a knock at the door, unexpected, my heart jolting as I peered through the peephole. Not them, a detective from the station, badge flashing under the hall light. I opened it cautiously, chain still latched. "Miss Thompson, follow up on your statement. Can I come in?" He was polite, notebook ready, and I let him, guiding him to the kitchen table while Freya stayed in her room, door ajar. He asked questions, details on the drugging timeline, the visits, my investigation, his pen scratching steadily as I recounted, pulling up the phone photos for him to copy. "This is solid," he said, nodding, his chair shifting as he stood. "Arraignment tomorrow. You might be called to testify." As he left, pamphlet on victim resources in hand, I locked the door twice, the bolts sliding home like fortifications. Rule 3. Cooperate with authorities but on our terms. No unsolicited updates, no pressure. Night fell, Freya asleep early, her breathing even through the cracked door. I paced the living room, phone in hand, blocking numbers one by one, my mother's cell, Claire's, even Martin's office line that somehow got through with a settlement offer. Each block felt like laying bricks, building a wall against their intrusion. But one call slipped in late. My aunt, Mom's sister, voice tearful. "Heather, your mother's devastated. Jail's no place for her. Can't you drop charges?" I gripped the phone, knuckles whitening, the cordless base cool against my palm. "Aunt Linda, they hurt Freya, no." Her sigh was heavy, pleading turning to guilt. "Family forgives," but I cut her off, voice firm. "Not this, don't call again." Hanging up, the click resonated, a line drawn, Rule 4, no intermediaries, no emotional blackmail. The aftermath handling peaked in that solitude, rules solidifying like a fortress blueprint. Screen all contact, prioritize therapy sessions I'd scheduled for us both, redirect any family outreach to the lawyer I'd retained that afternoon via phone consult. Internally, realization dawned. This wasn't isolation, it was sovereignty, reclaiming space from those who'd invaded it. Freya emerged once, pajama-clad, hugging me from behind. "Thanks for the rules," she murmured, her chin on my shoulder. I turned, embracing her, the hug lingering. "We're the family now," I said, and she nodded, retreating to bed. Alone again, I sat at my desk, journaling the day's events, calls logged, boundaries noted, the pen flowing steadily, each word reinforcing the walls. No more porous edges, this fortress was ours, unbreachable. No more porous edges, this fortress was ours, unbreachable. And in the days that followed, as the legal machinery ground forward with indictments and frozen assets, I turned my focus inward to the inheritance that had sparked it all. Uncle Henry's legacy, now fully in Freya's hands after the courts invalidated their fraudulent claims. It wasn't just money, it was his cabin by the lake, his savings tucked away for dreams he saw in her, not them. This afternoon, 2 weeks post-arrest, became the pivot. The event where I sat down with Freya and a quiet estate lawyer named Elena, papers spread across our kitchen table like a map to reclamation, using those funds not for revenge, but to forge a path that honored his memory while rewriting our story, claiming the family name on terms that erased their shadow. The sun slanted through the window blinds, casting striped patterns on the oak table I'd salvaged from a thrift shop years ago, its surface scarred from countless meals and late-night sketches. Freya sat across from me, her legs tucked under her, a mug of chamomile tea steaming in her hands. She'd switched to herbal after the detox, the scent floral and calming, a deliberate choice away from anything reminiscent of their vitamins. Elena, recommended by the social worker Maria, arrived promptly at 2 p.m., her briefcase clicking open with a snap that echoed in the small space. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, her glasses perched on her nose as she laid out documents, the will reaffirmed, bank statements, property deeds. "Everything's clear now," she said, her voice even, pen uncapping with a soft pop. "Freya's the beneficiary. We can discuss allocation, trusts, investments, or direct use." I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, fingers interlacing as I glanced at Freya, who fiddled with the mug handle, twisting it back and forth, the ceramic scraping faintly against the wood. She'd been quieter since the hospital, but stronger too. Therapy twice a week, art supplies scattered in her room like bursts of color reclaiming space. "What do you want to do with it?" I asked her, my tone gentle, giving her the lead. This wasn't about me dictating. It was her inheritance, her future to shape. She bit her lip, eyes dropping to the papers, her nail tracing the edge of the deed for the cabin. "Uncle Henry, he always said to use it for something that makes you happy, right? Not just save it." Her voice was tentative, but there, a spark, the first I'd seen since before the withdrawal set in. Elena nodded, adjusting her glasses with a push of her finger, the frames catching the light. "Absolutely, we can set up a trust for education, or perhaps a foundation if there's a cause." She slid a sample form across, the paper whispering over the table. I watched Freya's face, the way her brows furrowed in thought, her free hand reaching for a pencil from the cup nearby, doodling absent-mindedly on a napkin, swirls that looked like waves, lake-inspired. The cabin had been Henry's retreat, where he'd taught her to sketch birds and skip stones, memories untainted by the family's greed. "What if we turn the cabin into something?" Freya said suddenly, her pencil pausing, lead hovering. "Like an art camp for kids, ones who don't have much, like we didn't always." Her eyes met mine, searching, vulnerable but determined, her shoulders straightening slightly as she set the pencil down with a clack. The idea hit me like sunlight breaking clouds, positive impact, not hoarding or spite. Henry's name had been dragged through their conspiracy, but this reclaimed it, turning Thompson from a label of neglect to one of generosity. I felt a swell in my chest, pride mixing with relief, my hand reaching to cover hers, fingers squeezing gently. "That's perfect," I murmured, my voice catching. Elena smiled faintly, her pen jotting notes, the scratch quick and efficient. "Viable. We'd allocate funds for renovations, programs, set it as a nonprofit, tax benefits, sustainability." She pulled another sheet, outlining steps, incorporation, budgets, her finger pointing to line items as she explained. Freya leaned in, her mug set aside with a thud, forgotten tea cooling, her attention sharpening as she asked, "How much would it take? The savings cover it?" We dove deeper then, numbers unfolding like a plan taking shape. Elena's calculator clicked under her thumbs, digits appearing on the screen as she tallied. $150,000 for cabin upgrades, new roofs, art studios, docks for kayaks, $100,000 seeded into an endowment for operations, scholarships for low-income kids. Freya's input flowed now, her voice gaining confidence, hands gesturing as she described, summer workshops, drawing nature, like Henry did. I added logistics. My design skills for branding, logos sketched roughly on scrap paper, lines curving under my pen. The table became a canvas of possibility, papers shuffling as we passed them, coffee rings staining corners from my earlier mug. Emotionally, it grounded me, each decision a step away from the dinner's humiliation, where they'd tried to steal this very future. My jaw tightened briefly at the memory, teeth pressing, but I released it, focusing on Freya's growing excitement, her cheeks flushing as she envisioned kids like me finding escape. Elena's questions probed gently. Timeline, start small, pilot program next summer? Freya nodded eagerly, her foot tapping under the table, energy bubbling. Yeah, and name it after him, Henry's Haven or something. The words hung, poignant, my eyes stinging as I blinked back moisture, hand wiping subtly under my lashes. Reclaiming the name, Thompson attached to healing, not harm. I thought of my parents in holding, Claire's bail denied for flight risk, their legacy tarnished while we built anew. No revenge, just elevation. We'll need board members, Elena continued, her briefcase yielding more forms, clips snapping. You two as founders, perhaps community allies. I volunteered contacts, local artists I'd freelanced with, their numbers jotted in my phone, thumbs typing quick notes. The meeting stretched, sunlight shifting to afternoon gold, casting longer shadows across the floor. Freya stood at one point, pacing to the window, her silhouette framed, hands clasping behind her back as she stared out. This feels right, she said softly, turning back, her steps light as she returned. We signed initial intents, pens scratching in unison, the sound synchronized like harmony. Elena packed up, briefcase closing with finality, her handshake firm. I'll file tomorrow. Congratulations, this is impactful. As she left, door clicking shut, Freya hugged me impulsively, arms tight, her chin digging into my shoulder. Thanks for letting me decide, she whispered, pulling back, eyes bright. Alone again, we cleared the table, paper stacked neatly, my hands smoothing creases. Internally, peace settled. This wasn't just using success, it was transforming pain into purpose, honoring Henry by extending his kindness, the family name now ours to define. Freya grabbed her sketchbook, flipping pages, ideas flowing onto paper, cabin layouts, kid figures drawing lakeside. I watched, heart full, the positive ripple starting here, in our kitchen, far from their table of deceit. Alone again, we cleared the table, papers stacked neatly on the counter, the faint rustle echoing in the quiet apartment as Freya retreated to her room with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, the door closing softly behind her. I lingered at the sink, rinsing mugs under the warm stream, suds bubbling over my hands, the water's heat seeping into my skin like a gentle reminder to pause. The afternoon light had faded to evening dusk, shadows lengthening across the floor, and with Elena gone, the weight of what we'd just set in motion settled over me. Not heavy, but profound, prompting a deep reflection on how far we'd come from that disastrous dinner. Realizing that my worth wasn't tied to their approval or even this new venture, but something internal, unshakable, leading to a true peace I'd chased for years. I dried my hands on a dish towel, folding it precisely over the oven handle, the fabric's texture grounding me as I moved to the living room couch, sinking into the cushions with a sigh that released tension I hadn't noticed building. My eyes wandered to the framed photo on the side table. Me and Freya at the lake with Uncle Henry, his arm around her shoulders, all of us laughing at some forgotten joke, the sun glinting off the water behind us. That image, once a pang of loss, now felt like a touchstone. Henry's death had unraveled everything, exposing the family's rot, but in piecing it back, I'd uncovered my own strength. Not the flashy kind Claire flaunted, but quiet resilience. Raising Freya alone, building a freelance career from scraps, investigating their scheme in secret nights fueled by coffee and fear. I'd always measured myself against their yardstick. Stable jobs, perfect facades, coming up short, internalizing the neglect as my failing. But sitting there, legs curled under me, the couch springs creaking faintly as I shifted, I let that go. My worth wasn't in proving them wrong or even in the art camp's success. It was intrinsic, rooted in the choices I'd made, the call to 911, the boundaries set, the space created for Freya to heal. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, the air filling my lungs slowly, exhaling the remnants of doubt. Peace washed in. Not euphoric but steady, like the lake's calm surface after a storm. No more chasing validation from people who'd never give it. I validated myself, through actions that protected, through love that didn't demand reciprocity. Freya's laughter filtered from her room, muffled but genuine, sketching her visions. That sound alone affirmed it. The reflection deepened as night fell, streetlights flickering on outside the window, casting a soft glow through the curtains. I thought of the arrests, the courtroom dates looming, my parents' pleas from jail, Claire's lawyer scrambling. But it didn't stir anger anymore, just detachment. Their actions were theirs, mine were about forward motion. I'd reclaimed not just the legacy, but my narrative. From the outcast at the table, enduring their contempt, to the architect of our future. My hands, idle in my lap, flexed slightly, remembering the notes crumple, the phone's wait during the call. That spark I'd felt then? It had ignited change, but the peace came from knowing I didn't need the fire to burn others, just to light my own path. Freya emerged later, pajamas on, holding a rough drawing of the cabin transformed, kids with easels by the water, Henry's name etched in the sign. "What do you think?" she asked, sitting beside me, the paper crinkling as she handed it over. I traced the lines with my finger, the pencil marks smudging slightly. "It's everything," I said, pulling her close, her head resting on my shoulder, warmth spreading. In that embrace, the final piece clicked. Self-validation wasn't solitary. It echoed in her trust, in our bond forged stronger through the ordeal. No abstract worth, real, tangible in the quiet moments like this. As she headed to bed, light switching off with a click, I stayed on the couch. The apartment hushed, save for the distant hum of traffic. Peace settled fully, internal and complete. I was enough, always had been, without their nod or society's mold. The journey from that dinner's humiliation to here wasn't about triumph over them, but over the doubts they'd planted. I rose finally, locking the door out of habit, the bolt sliding home, then turned off the lamp, darkness enveloping like a comforting blanket. Sleep came easy that night, dreams of the lake serene, my worth no longer a question but a quiet truth. Have you ever felt like your family's expectations were holding you back from seeing your own strength? For me, realizing that my worth came from within, not from their approval, was the real turning point after all the chaos. It wasn't about getting even. It was about getting free and building something meaningful with Freya. We turned Uncle Henry's inheritance into a haven for kids who need it, honoring his memory and reclaiming our story. But honestly, the peace? That came from knowing I didn't need anyone else's validation to feel whole. If you've got a similar story, maybe a toxic family dynamic you broke free from, or a moment where you flipped a bad situation into something positive, share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you found your own peace, or set those boundaries that changed everything. Your experiences could inspire someone else going through it right now. So what do you think? Did I go too far in cutting them off, or not far enough in protecting us sooner? Drop a comment below. Like if this resonated, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of turning pain into power. Thanks for listening. Remember, your worth is yours to define.